Hi everyone, welcome to this next in our series of Brigstow Presents. So we've had a whole series of these over the last few months, and they've been a great opportunity to find out a little bit more about the seed corn projects that we funded. Brigstow is a research institute at the university that loves to try and create a more equitable space for researchers from lots of different disciplinary backgrounds and from outside of the university to come together to explore questions. And the questions that are going to be focused on today are really around accessibility in the digital. So we've got two teams, AD4 Games and Prehension Blooms, who'll be talking a bit about their projects. One of the things we're doing is we're recording these sessions so that people can see them afterwards. If you want to ask a question later on, we'd love you to ask a question, but obviously if you'd prefer not to ask a question on a recording, then please just pop it into the chat and I'll make sure that I pick it up, or Gail or Julie or Kerry will pick it up, and we'll make sure we ask that. But if you'd like to ask a question and you're really happy to do that in a kind of virtual face-to-face way, then please just indicate that using the hand function, raise a hand, when we get to Q&A later. You'll find a transcript available at the bottom of the screen. So just down there, it should say live transcript, and you'll be able to read along. What we'll do is we'll have about 20 minutes for each group to talk a bit about their work, what they've discovered so far, about the research, but also about working together as a co-produce or interdisciplinary team. And then there'll be a chance for questions and discussion right at the end. But maybe I could introduce the first team, AD4 Games. And AD4 Games is a group that came to us in Brigstow with a question really about, well, what would it look like to try and co-create games with those who are visually impaired? And to think a little bit about live description and computer gaming. And so I think Xiaochun's going to introduce the work. And what I've asked Xiaochun to do is maybe just to give us a flavor of what their project is about, what their sort of research questions were, and in particular, maybe a little bit of a sense of what they've started to discover together as a team. So over to you, Xiaochun.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, it's great to have this opportunity to present AD4 Games here. And so to start with our description, I'm a Chinese person with shoulder-length black hair, dark brown eyes, where I'm wearing a pair of glasses with a brown frame. So I'm wearing a red jumper today. So I would like to share some slides and so also to present the what we have produced in this project. So I'm going to share my slides now.
That's perfect.
Okay, that's great. So the slides follows the accessible presentation guidelines. So you may find it a little bit plain, but the text on the slides are black against the white background, and I also left some space at the bottom for the live subtitling. So I will start by briefly introduce the background of the this project. So as we all know, video games have become a worldwide phenomenon. So there are 29 billion players in the world in 2021, but most of the games are not accessible yet or fully accessible for players with disabilities. So the challenges for users with diverse abilities when playing video games may include not being able to receive stimuli or cannot establish how to take specific actions that allow the game to move forward, or they cannot interact with the game devices and provide input. So despite this, gamers also like to play games and have equal fun as everyone else. So there are different options. So they can play simplified versions or play with sighted families and friends or play audio games. So audio games are games built on audible and tactic feedback with no visual elements, which are therefore blind accessible. It is fun to play audio games, but and it is one of the solutions to game accessibility, but the majority of games are based on visual elements. So for this project, we are thinking maybe there will be ways to make existing games accessible for visually impaired players. So audio description is a service that describes visual elements to the audience. So it has been used or applied to films or TV and different cultural events, but not yet are widely used in video game, in streaming or in games themselves. So against this background, we brought together professional audio describers, Jane, so one of them is here. So if you have any questions, you can ask her later. And the game developers, Claire, she's also here today. And then several visually impaired players or participants. So we use the game, before I forget, which is developed by Claire. So if you have more questions about the game, she will be here to answer your questions. So before I forget, is an environmental narrative game, also known as working simulator. So it's a type of adventure game focusing on a gradual exploration and discovery through observation with little action. So we consider it a perfect game to test whether audio description would work in games. So as a player, you will play Sunita, a woman who is alone in a house looking for her husband Dylan. So by exploring objects in the house, the players gets to know the story of Sunita's life. So the first step of the game is to investigate how AD can be applied to game streaming or game playing. So we identified 3 ways. So the first is a description for a recorded gameplay video. So where AD is produced by the same method as they are typically done for film and TV. So in this project, one of the academics played the game and recorded the gameplay, and Jane wrote the script for the gameplay video with time codes and did the recording as well. So now I will show you the example. So on the left is a script of audio description, and this is what you are going to hear.
Against a background of pastel yellows, pinks and mauves, black text in a handwritten font reads, "Before I forget." Then the logos for Threefold Games, Humble Originals, Made with Unity and FMOD. On a menu of options, click New Game.
Okay. Now we'll
Against a background of
Now we'll show
against a background of pastel yellows, pinks and mauves.
Difficult is this.
Against a background of pastel yellows, pinks.
Okay, now so
against a background of pastel yellows, pinks and against a background.
Sorry. So I will
against a background of pastel yellows, pinks and mauves.
I will skip for now because all the videos are actually available on YouTube. So maybe for now I will move. So this is the first method, and it's similar to the traditional AD. Unfortunately, didn't work here. But now I will move on to the second method, where AD is provided for a live game streaming session. So in this session, the audio describer describes the way a player interacts with the game. So we have, so during the COVID, it's good fun. We find it actually technically challenging to stream the gameplay and the live AD simultaneously, while the player and the audio describers are in 2 locations. So in the end, the player shared his screen with the audio describer, while Zoom and the audio describer streamed AD on Twitch with the shared Zoom screen. So it worked, but the player couldn't hear the audio describer. So gameplay can be quite unpredictable, and so that's how we produced the second one. But we had quite positive feedback from the audience. So I will quickly show you, hopefully this video works.
So we find ourselves inside a room in a house, an almost colourless room, but outside the window you can see the red bricks of another building and a green bush. The view of the room is blurry, but there are But there are some glasses on a table which have been picked up and turned around.
Is this the right place? Ah, Dylan will know. I'll find him.
There's a note on the desk, a post-it note. It says, "Gas bill overdue, we'll sort it together." Because the glasses have been...
Overdue? Why hasn't Dylan paid it?
There's an envelope which has an urgent stamp on it. And colour.
So this is the second method of audio describing live gameplay. So you can see it didn't sync very well because the players and the location and the audio describers are in different location. The third method we have tried is audio describer delivers a live AD while playing the game, so acting both as audio describer and a game streamer. We'll play a short video as well, so you can see the different methods we tried.
We find ourselves inside a room. It's a bit blurry and washed of colour, although there is a lampshade that is pink, and there seems to be a yellow post-it note on a pinboard straight ahead, but it's very out of focus. To my right, out of the window, there's a big planter outside with a green bush in it, and a red brick wall and a yellow window frame, which suggests the lack of colour is only inside. So I'm going to walk ahead to the table. There's a pair of glasses on the table.
Where am I?
I'm going to select the glasses, and they've gone from black to a sort of brown tortoiseshell colour. I'm going to turn them around. And
is this the right place? Ah, Dylan will know. I'll find him.
So I've put the glasses on, and now the room is in focus. And on the post-it note on the pinboard, it says, "Find Dylan." I'm going to walk a bit closer. There are other notes on the pinboard that have all been scribbled out, but on all of them it says, "Find Dylan." We find...
So in this session, the audio describer felt more in control in terms of what's happening in the game and what to describe next. But it's quite challenging because she has to multitasking. So these three gameplay videos with audio description are now made available on YouTube under 84 Games channel. We have invited blind and visually impaired viewers to fill in an open online survey. So after producing each AD as a team, we discuss the process and the challenges, and so we discovered that one of the challenges may be unique to audio describing video games is which pronoun to use. So it is also linked to video games as a media. So when audio describing someone else's gameplay, in this project, for example, the players play Sunita, but there isn't an avatar in the game, and the players sees what Sunita would see with a first-person view. Should the audio describer describe what the player does as Sunita or what Sunita does in her world? should the description be provided as if the audience is playing and interacting with the game, or as a co-player? So we don't yet know the answer, but one of the participants or survey participants state that it would be great, it would be much better if the describer described how the player was playing the game. Like player looks left, sees glasses and selects glasses instead of there are some glasses on the desk. Meanwhile, other audience have other preferences. So we are waiting to get more answers from the survey participants to know what the majority of audience prefer. So in terms of script-based or live AD, the pros and cons are well summarized actually by a participant who wrote script-based description, which is the first method, wouldn't allow for community interaction, but would provide a tighter and a more cinematic gaming experience, since all the right words would be used to convey exactly what's happening, as opposed to live description, where describer may not be able to think of the right word, forcing them to approximate. So the interaction between the audio describer and the visually impaired players was then experiment with the second stage of this project, which is AD-assisted gameplay. So we had two groups of participants. So in this experiment, the audio describer will describe visual elements to the happening in the game to the visually impaired players live based on their action in the game. So, so the players will be they were playing the game while the audio describers providing audio description. So the audio description was very personalized in this way, and there are lots of dialogues between the audio describers and the players. So it was more interactive. And with all the information we have gathered, the data collected. So the team now is working with the game designers, so Claire is here, to explore possible ways of implementing audio description in the game. So currently we have added audio cues and audio description and created a tutorial room to help the players to engage with the accessibility features. So, so we are hoping to make the game more accessible, and we have tested the this version with 3 participants so far, and the preliminary finding is that the visually impaired players find the game, the updated game, very useful and very helpful while they are playing. There are some issues with the blind users, so further adaptations are needed to make the game accessible for completely blind players. So from a theoretical perspective, this is a very interesting project. We practice collaborative translation or co-creative design perspective approach to explore the interactions among game designers or describers and game players. So yeah, and then during the pandemic, it has been difficult to recruit blind and visually impaired participants. And we are hoping to find more participants to test the game and further improve the game. So yeah, I think that's all from me. So that's where we are at the moment, and it would be great if you have any questions. And we do have the Claire and Jane here to answer your questions as well.
Great, thanks so much, Xiaochun. Maybe what I could do is maybe invite Claire and Jane to contribute. And what I'd love to ask you both, I should in good audio description style describe myself, the fact that I'm wearing a grey jumper today, aren't I? I've got my glasses on top of my short brown hair, and I've got brown eyes. I am sitting in a room that has a light green wall and has a couple of pictures behind me. And what I'd love to do is invite Jane and Claire maybe to offer some reflections from your own perspective as a computer game designer and an audio describer, respectively, about working in this kind of co-design group that I think was involved 3 academics. So Xiaochun from Translation Studies, a colleague who's an environmental historian but also works in disability studies, and then a colleague in computer science whose focus is on serious gaming. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your reflections of working in a co-design context with those different people as well as with those who are visually impaired. And I don't know, in particular, I'd be interested in if it brought anything back to your own discipline, your own kind of disciplinary approach as a computer game designer and as an audio describer. Maybe Claire, are you okay to go first and to offer us some reflections on working on this project, this kind of co-design project?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so to introduce myself, yeah, I'm Claire, and I was one of the developers on Before I Forget, and I guess, yeah, an audio description introduction to myself as well. I'm sitting on a sofa with a sort of bright yellow wall behind me. I've got a green jumper on. I have a fringe and hair that's tied back, blue eyes, and yeah, so I was really excited getting involved in this project because accessibility was something that we were keen on when we were originally developing Before I Forget, and so we had, you know, features in there that dealt with things like just, you know, text size and text speed and sort of camera sensitivity and that kind of thing. But this, I mean, the sort of audio description side of accessibility in games is something that is still in early stages within the games industry, so it was really exciting to get to know more about what we could do. And I think especially because it was at the point at which I became involved in the project, the game had already been released, so it was more of a matter of sort of seeing how we could retrofit this into a game that had been already made, which I imagine would be quite a different process than if you were to design the game with that in mind from the beginning, which I think ideally with any accessibility thing you would do. So yeah, it was definitely an interesting exercise in terms of thinking more based on what we've got, what can we do to add that in. Yeah, and it was really amazing, like working with people with different expertise across different fields. You know, while we were working on the game itself, it was primarily working with other people in the games industry. So it was like nice to get sort of different perspectives on it, which I suppose we did have a little bit during the game. I mean, we did work with a couple of medical professionals so the game, the topic of the game is so Sunita's suffering with dementia, so we did consult with people outside of the games industry on that, and I think every time that we have worked with people outside the games industry, it's always just been, I don't know, just a nice experience to have sort of, yeah, think of things that we wouldn't normally think of. Yeah, it was really positive, I think, in terms of what it brought back to me for my practice. Definitely this idea of thinking about accessibility as early as possible within the project, because I think retrofitting something like that can be done, but it's definitely, you know, there's a lot of design decisions that I would have made, I would have done differently if I had been thinking about that from the early stages of the game.
Great, thanks so much. Claire, maybe Jamie could bring you in to reflect a little bit on your own experience. And I don't know if you've worked before with computer game designers, I was also interested in whether the responses of gamers themselves like surprised you, because I think what's really lovely about this project is how you experimented with a number of different forms of audio description. And maybe you could reflect a little bit on how those different forms went down with the different audiences and gamers that you work with.
Sorry, were you bringing me in there?
Yeah, Jane, that's right. That would be great.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm Jane Devoy. I'm a freelance audio describer and I'm also a filmmaker. I've got long brown hair, fringe, glasses, and I'm wearing a Icelandic patterned cardigan and a black scarf with little white spots. So I mean, I think actually it's probably easy for me in a way to start with talking about what the process was like as an audio describer kind of coming into this project, because it was so different from anything I'd worked on before. Is that okay if I...
Yeah, no, that's great. That'd be fantastic.
That, yeah. So because I specialize in audio describing film and television, so I did the first version, which was to audio describe the recorded gameplay. This was obviously much more similar to what I would normally do. There's an existing recording and all the elements are there, and it's a kind of consistent relationship with time and space. We know what image comes after the other image, and it's not going to change. So in terms of a process, that was perfectly, kind of feasible for me to do. But it did take a long time, much longer than my usual projects would, because there was very little dialogue. So we're here describing the visual elements. So there were a lot, and there's also a lot of lovely graphic detail to describe. Plus there's the movement of the player. So there were a lot of elements to describe, a lot of things to describe, and a lot of space to describe it. So, it took sort of about 10 times as long as it would to do like a normal TV program. So that was something that, we kind of reflected on later, that in terms of practically in the industry, how you would compensate an audio describer, how you would put that into a budget of a game would be significant, I think. But what was really interesting, the feedback there about that particular one is that, what it doesn't have is the dynamic interplay that gaming has with its player. It is treating a game like a recorded film, which is just a sort of snapshot of what that game might be like to play. But you'd be knowing that was just one person's version of it. But that they said that, because it was kind of fixed, the language was able to be more precise or more, tailored to the image. So that was kind of the positive side of it. Could spend time getting the right words. Whereas that's although I think it was done really well in the live, that's obviously much more challenging because you're having to just think of it on the spot. But it's certainly, it doesn't have that kind of dynamic play with the game or with the player or with somebody listening to it. And so then the next stages that we did of the playing the game and then describing it was much more challenging initially for me, because I'd played the game, but I didn't know it. I knew that my version of the game would be different from somebody else's, and every version of the game will be different, which is of course the main difference between a recorded piece and a dynamic game piece. And so I didn't know if which corners or cupboards or objects I might have missed, which bits of narrative I might have missed on my version. So it was really, really important at that point that we collaborated, and Claire's input was very important, that she was able to kind of bring in a spreadsheet with all the different objects and all the different locations. So any that we'd missed, we were able to make sure that we scripted and we recorded versions of that. So that I think we had to do that together, basically. And then the other interesting area was about the sort of positioning of the player and the kind of directing of the player's movements, because that's obviously crucial to making it accessible, not just what do we see, but how do we move in that space. And Claire's done some brilliant sounds which kind of equal a certain, for example, a tone. If you get too close to a wall, it's telling you need to move back or you need to turn. And then the whole tutorial room, which is basically where you're kind of being taught the sort of key to those sounds. And so I think, what Xiaochun was saying about if it was integrated into the game design, then sounds or haptic signifiers would help even more with that orientation in the space.
Great, thank you so much. That's great. I think what I know that you've got plans to carry on this work. We were chatting to Xiaochun earlier, and there's plans to take that forward. Would it be possible to pop into the chat the YouTube link? Because it'd be great, I think, for many people to be able to see some of the clips that you showed in greater detail. So maybe if there's any chance of popping that in the chat, that'd be lovely. And then what we'll do is we'll have some questions in a moment. But what I wanted to do next was to move on to Prehension Blooms and to invite them to share a little bit about their project, and then we'll collect the questions together. Prehension Blooms is a project that again is thinking about accessibility in the digital, but is specifically thinking about access to creative spaces for those who are isolated, and thinking a bit about soft robotics as a way to do that. And so, Adrian, maybe I could ask you to introduce the project and tell us a little bit about the research questions that you were setting out to ask. And then maybe I'll move to Hema to tell us a bit about what you discovered so far.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tim. Hi, everyone. My name is Adrian Hart, and I'm the artistic director of Neon Dance. I'm a white woman in my late 30s with long dark hair. I'm wearing a black dress and a green and white scarf. Our project, Prehension Blooms, expanding access to creative spaces for isolated people using soft robotics, explores social isolation and digital cultural participation. This project is a new collaboration between Neon Dance and University of Bristol's Hema Phillimore and Helen Manchester, who join me today. The project brings together Phillimore's expertise in robotics, Neon's creative dance practice, and Manchester's knowledge on loneliness and isolation, and collectively our interest and passion into co-creation, co-design, and digital cultural participation. So we focused on the development of a prototype kit of deployable robots in response to the question, how can I be present and connect with other bodies in a space where I am not? So by offering remote audiences the opportunity to actively take part in a live performance, our intention is to contribute to technology-based initiatives providing alternative ways to experience cultural spaces. Yeah, so that in a nutshell is the project. And Hema is going to talk a little bit more about what we discovered as a team so far.
Great, thanks so much. Over to you, Hema. Oh, Hema, I think you're on mute. We can't hear the audio. We can't hear you at the moment. What I might do is I might move to Helen at this point, and then Hema, do you want to just see if you can kind of maybe log off and log back on and check if you can find the audio. Helen, maybe could you tell us a little bit about working in this really super interdisciplinary group? I know you're a social scientist in education, and obviously you're working across robotics, social science, dance, a whole bunch of different people from very different disciplinary backgrounds and perspectives. Could you tell us a little bit about the learning of working in that kind of radically interdisciplinary way? And I guess a lot of people are interested in dipping their toes into the water of interdisciplinary and co-produced research. I mean, what are some of the challenges? What do you think are some of the things that you've found useful as a way of working around that as a group?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So I guess I made some notes before this and they don't look neat like other things. So I think that just kind of illustrates the messiness, I suppose, of trying to do this kind of work with interdisciplinary colleagues who might have different things that they want from the project as well. And I think it was really useful that first time we met that Brigstow helped us to do the monster thing, which is still on my board actually, but just to understand that people need and want different things from the process. So Adrian obviously is involved in putting together a performance. She has commitments to deliver that performance in certain timescales. Hema is really interested in cool soft robotics and working with that and sort of pushing things in that respect. And for me, I guess I was really interested in the interdisciplinarity and the journey of engaging with Hema and Adrian in thinking about some of these questions around connectedness and what does that really mean. So we all had really different reasons for getting involved in the first place. And it was really good, I think, to air those differences right at the beginning and to have that conversation about why we were all kind of fascinated and interested in getting involved in this process. I think we found as we went along, even in that first meeting, that we might use the same words, but they had different meanings. So we talked quite a lot about entanglement, and this is a word that is used a lot in soft robotics, and it's a word I use a lot in
based on social theory, I guess, and the way that we were talking about that was slightly different, and it was interesting to explore that. Another word that came up during the process of the co-design workshops and looking at the data was the idea of the uncanny, which again was something that I understood, I suppose, from a sort of sci-fi perspectives, but it's actually a term that's used a lot in soft robotics to mean something slightly different. And oh, sorry, someone's just trying to call me. I think also that the methods and ways of seeing, I suppose, that I think was a real strength of the three of us. And also we had some really brilliant PhD interns working with us who I need to mention as well, Elaine Check and Alice Haynes, who also added to that sort of methodological diversity as well, and different ways of seeing. So from a dancer's perspective and a creative producer's perspective, Adrian brought that real depth of understanding about bodies and materialities and embodiment to our understanding. And Hema and Alice had this real in-depth understanding of machines and robots and how they work, and bringing those two things together is amazing in itself. But then I guess also adding something about the social interaction and social connections and relationality of humans into that mix was really fascinating. But we all went about looking at that in slightly different ways, which I think added to what we were doing. So the methods that I might use were quite different to the methods that Hema and Alice might use. And Elaine also brought sort of design methods into that collaboration as well. But I think through bringing in all those different methods, we were able to kind of see what I would call that entanglement of the human machine interaction in different ways. So I think that was really positive in terms of the interdisciplinary approach.
Great, thanks so much, Helen. I can see Hema's back.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfectly.
Oh, great. I think my headphones ran out of battery while I was listening to the first part, so sorry about that.
This is a great, I think there's a great introduction there from Helen about that sense of like you find these words that you use, but you mean different things, and these different methods. Could you talk us through, Hema, a little bit about what you feel like you discovered? I mean, I know
sure.
It's a really short pilot project, but what did you find out? I don't know if there's anything that surprised you.
Yeah, absolutely. There were some things that were really nice kind of, I guess, confirmations of ideas that we have about robots, but don't necessarily often get the chance to test out. And then some surprises as well, which we've taken forward into the research that we're doing now, which has been really amazing. So the work that we did during the CCORN project kind of revolved around these workshops where we'd invite members of the public, sometimes representing sort of different demographics, to come and interact with some very early stage soft robotic prototypes, which I should actually go and grab from the shelf behind me. Maybe I'll do that in a second. And we were basically just getting them to control the motion of these robots using motion capture software, and then using that as a way to try and capture how they felt about that experience, and use that as a way to translate that into further iterations of those robots. What we ultimately want to use them for is a way for people to access performance remotely, as Adrian was saying. So we're really interested in how people perceived operation of the robots, as well as kind of watching someone operating the robots or interacting with someone who was operating a robot themselves. Something that really, for me, kind of confirmed that this was a really useful way of approaching robot design, sort of using sort of involving users early on in the work, was that people who had a kind of pre-existing familiarity with robots or of related technology tends to have more kind of positive preconceived ideas about robots, whereas people who maybe were less familiar with them kind of had more of a negative preconception, that maybe kind of lived more in the world of sci-fi, which can be really, really cool, but also really scary. So I think it was a really motivating thing to use this type of co-creation process to involve people in work that's sort of aimed at producing robots to interact with humans. Something, again, that really reinforced this process of using creative spaces and using performance in robot design was the idea of narrative, and how important narrative was in people sort of finding the robots engaging and wanting to work with them, and kind of understanding how they worked intuitively. And so where there was a sort of lack of narrative in what we were doing, which was sometimes the case with quite early prototypes, this was something that really caused sort of a bit of confusion or ambiguity or disengagement. And so in the work that we're doing now, which is kind of continuing with this co-creation process, we're looking a lot more at integrating more of a narrative, more of a kind of performance aspect into it, and bringing in elements like the use of dancers through Neon Dance in creating a narrative around the robots that are being used in the space. Another really interesting point, which I guess is more of a technical thing, was that there seemed to be this kind of surprisingly kind of nonlinear relationship between different factors of robot motion and the amount of engagement that we saw in people. So when people had this sort of perception that they were able to kind of control the robot, or when they were, you know, in practically controlling the robot in a more accurate way, there was a sense of kind of like familiarity, or sort of like a kind of game-like aspect to what the to how people seemed to feel, or how they expressed that they felt. But there was also kind of maybe a sense of boredom in some of the more simple motions that we were creating, whereas where the robot was kind of less responsive and maybe its behavior seemed a little bit more random, there was a mixture of responses in that people seemed to either feel that they were kind of learning the quirks of the robot, and it had this sort of behavior of a pet. And pulled out a quote that I really liked that Helen and Elaine captured really well in the report they wrote on the workshops, where someone said it's like a pet, it's an independent animal, I've just got it on a leash. So it was like this sort of semblance of control, but also the robot having a bit of a life of its own, and people seem to find that quite exciting, which was nice. So now we're kind of trying to unpick that a little bit more, where this sort of region of operation lies, where the operation of the robot sort of sits in the middle of being something that has this kind of lifelike quality, where it seems to have a little bit of autonomy that's maybe quite mysterious or unpredictable, but also trying to work on motion that makes people feel like they have a familiarity and an element of control over the robot's motion. Yeah, so that's, I think, the main things that I've taken from the main things that we've discovered as a team until this point.
Great, thanks so much for that, Helen. That's so interesting about that sense of people almost like wanting to control the robot, but not fully control the robot. Like the robot has its own kind of life and existence that's kind of more than human in this exchange. Adrian, maybe we could bring you back in at this point, because I'd be really interested in your own experience as a dancer and someone who's got a kind of practice within dance, about your own reflections on what this experiment has brought back into your own dance practice. So working with Hema and Helen and the PhD students involved in the team as well, and experimenting with soft robotics. And I don't know if you've worked with robotics much before as a dancer, but what you feel like you take away from this and insert back into your own dance practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's been a really fascinating experience for me as a dancer, as a choreographer, a maker. And I think primarily it's, I've worked collaboratively before. I've never worked with robotics specifically, but a lot of different types of technologies. So I'm very comfortable interacting with artists, academics outside of my own discipline. But there was this wonderful opportunity with this project to not only go through a series of workshops and experiences with members of the public, but also to then capture that and have this report at the end that I can take and share and present in other contexts. So this project doesn't just happen and then disappear again. It feels that it's got a legacy now that we can build on and take forward. So I think that's really the main thing. That I've been really excited, and yeah, just a wonderful team of people, and that each coming with their own sets of experiences that have meant that there's collectively a richer dialogue and a richer making process ultimately.
That's great. And maybe I don't know if that's available. It'd be really great to pop into the chat the link, if it's possible, to that report. If it's available, would be fantastic. Adrian, obviously this happened in the context of a global pandemic. Could you talk us through what are the practicalities? Obviously, within dance, that had a massive impact upon the creative industries, you know, and especially upon performance. And how did the global pandemic, I mean, in a sense, I guess, shape the way you work? But I think also that what you were doing was very much interested in many ways in thinking about hybridity and about hybrid audiences. What are your reflections on kind of that broader sense of live dance, technologies, hybrid audiences, and global pandemic?
Yeah, so I mean, it's obviously no one expected it. It came really out of the blue, but the pandemic has actually had a positive impact on this project, as it forced us to think creatively about reaching different audiences, both in person and remotely. And we began looking into the recent emergence of robotics as a means for isolated people to experience spaces remotely for cultural and social interaction. And so we were looking at, for example, the use of robotics to enable people with severe physical disabilities to access jobs. For example, that's the Robot Cafe in Tokyo, Japan's a great example of that. And also a means for people in isolation to visit recreational spaces, such as art galleries and museums. So Hastings Contemporary Art Gallery has an ongoing project there, and I witnessed in person at Oxford University at the Natural History Museum, a group of school children attending a day looking around the museum, and a child that was in hospital was able to attend via a robot avatar. So these kind of projects and initiatives are out there, and I think more will come. As a result, actually, in part, or been sped up at least through a result of the pandemic. And you know, within my own discipline in the world of dance, theatres are finding vulnerable people who would have frequently attended cultural events in the past are still actually quite reluctant to return in the current climate, whilst others of their current audiences are really hungry for live events again, having been bombarded with online offers over the last few years. And so this led us as a team to consider how we might create a work that brings together both in-person and remote audiences in a meaningful way. So having one of our robots teleoperated would really allow this opportunity for interaction and exchange between the live audience and the remote audience. So and this is quite speculative at the minute, but we're sort of dreaming about a performance scenario where a robot could be set up at the box office or in the cafe or the bar pre-performance, and there could be some live and remote interaction there. But also during the live performance, the robots will interact and create and react to live audience members and performers. But then there could also be a unique experience as a remote audience member, where you become one of the robots, essentially step into the robot's shoes during the show itself. And lastly, one of our biggest challenges is that we will present this work in Japan as part of Sutauchi Art Triennial this autumn. And as it stands currently, Japan aren't allowing people from abroad to travel into the country as a result of the ongoing pandemic. So we've been discussing with the festival an alternative way to present this work out there. And the Sutauchi area is part of the inland sea, has a declining population, with young people often leaving to find work in big cities. And the older people there left on the islands have felt vulnerable during the pandemic. And so we've really wanted to offer a safe cultural experience whilst exploring ideas around isolation and companionship. So we're currently planning to offer an installation version of Prehension Blooms without live performers, which will allow the local people to use their bodies to control the robots whilst interacting and connecting potentially with anyone in the world. So that's something that I'm really, really excited about. And yeah, it's kind of all started with this exchange, which yeah, it feels like it's a really strong foundation to build on.
Thank you so much. That's amazing. I think what's amazing about both these projects is that you get this lovely sense of like all of these disparate people with very different disciplines and skill sets and a kind of real grounding in their own knowledge coming together, and these things happening at the edges and in between those things that kind of is creating something greater than the sum of the parts, I guess, but also with the learning back. But I think they're also amazing projects because they both imagine technologies as ways to create kind of new natures of accessibility and to challenge our understanding of bodies and their limits and limitations. Like there's something really interesting, I think, about bringing these two projects into conversation because there's some really shared areas of interest that characterizes them. We've got a few minutes left for questions, and please feel free to either pop them in the chat if you'd prefer me to read them out rather than to appear on screen as we're recording this, or if you're happy to appear on screen, then please just pop your hand up. And the two groups that we have, feel free to ask questions to each other because I know in many ways this is the first time you're hearing about each other's projects. So also do feel free to ask any questions that you might have. So we've got 5 or 10 minutes and feel free to ask any questions that you might have.
Can I ask a question to the other group?
Of course you can, Emma, please do.
I was really curious to know what sort of motivated the storyline of the game.
I think maybe if we take that over to Claire, and there's a question from Jane to you, Hema, which is, can we see one of the robots? So
yeah.
You'll get an answer as long as you produce a robot. But maybe Claire, do you want to say a little bit about what motivated the storyline of the game?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for the question. So yeah, the game was primarily made by myself and one other person, Chella, Ramanan, and so she's the writer and narrative designer on the team, and I did the sort of programming and art, and we worked together on the game design. And the story mostly came from her. The two of us met at a game jam where like people got together in groups and then sort of had a weekend to make like a little prototype for a game. And the two of us were in a team together, and she had these sort of previous ideas around ideas to do with like identity and memory that she'd been kind of wanting to put into some kind of story. But I think when it came to the game jam, she was like, oh, actually maybe a game is the perfect medium for this, for like to explore some more detail. So yeah, it wasn't so much a sort of like personal connection to, I think it's something that we get asked sometimes, is like, is it based on like someone you know, or and for us it was more the kind of idea of like, I guess like looking at how we could show that kind of story through a video game, because I think video games are a really interesting medium to have that kind of I don't know, the like empathy that you can get through sort of being directly in someone's shoes like that and making choices that character would be making, you know, rather than just sort of reading through what they're doing. It seemed to like fit really well. So yeah, it just like sparked a lot of ideas when we initially started talking about it, and sort of ways that we could portray that character.
Great, thanks so much. Hema, do you have a robot to show us? I can see Hema.
Yeah, sorry, give me 1 second.
She's scooting away, as you can see. And if you just audio description, there's a lot of different amazing cases behind Hema that are full of all sorts of bits and pieces. It looks like a kind of workshop.
The robots that we used in the workshops were based around these very simple kind of building block. If I do that, you can see. So these are just sort of 3D printed rubber kind of tentacle-like structures, and they're actuated using some thermally actuated sort of muscle wires that behave a little bit like the muscles in our bodies, and they contract when actuated, and they're arranged in these sort of 2 muscle pairs. It's not plugged into anything at the bottom, so that's why I'm disappointingly moving it with my hands. But by starting with these kind of, I guess, like quite biomimetic, but quite kind of morphology-less shapes, we kind of wanted to invite people to envisage what they might look like. And in our current work, we're translating these more into some sort of, I guess they're kind of inspired by insect-like, quite skeletal designs that have been designed by Anna Rekovic, who's worked with Neon Dance for a long time and is doing the visual design on the project. So yes, sort of building block skeletal structures, what we've started with, and we're sort of building those into kind of insect-like forms.
Great, thanks so much. Thanks, Hema, and thanks, Xiaochun, for I think, Claire, you were overly modest. Claire's game, as Xiaochun points out, was nominated for a BAFTA. Congratulations, Claire, on that. It's really fantastic news. Anything else? Any other questions that people might have? Could I maybe just ask one, maybe just one final question, which is maybe just to invite Hema and Xiaochun just to say a little bit about, so what next? Like, what's the kind of question now? You started to touch on this a little bit, both of you. Maybe start with you, Hema. Like, what's the question you'd love to get an answer to next? What's really piqued your interest? And then maybe Xiaochun, I could just ask you to do that as well, reflect on that.
Yeah, so we've got another Impact Acceleration Award that we hold at the moment, and we've been exploring this question further with two postdocs that are employed on that. And I think the question that's really started to come out is, what is this kind of operating space where there's this kind of animacy and a little bit of sort of what seems like autonomous behavior, but also a kind of controllability and motion that makes people feel that the experience is meaningful and feel kind of connected to a robot that they're operating or interacting with. One of our two researchers is a part-time master's student in animation. So we're sort of looking at drawing on some principles from animation to sort of describe and then kind of play with different sort of factors that are used to classify motion. And then I think our next sort of step is to really realize this in a kind of open public environment. We've got a few more kind of co-creation workshops leading up to the performance in Japan, but I think that will be the first opportunity to really sort of test the work and see how people respond to it. And because it's spread over a few days, it'll be really nice to see how that performs with different audiences and how people find the experience of accessing the work remotely.
Great, thanks so much, Hema. It's an amazing project and really exciting to hear about the festival that you'll be working on in Japan. Xiaochun, do you want to fill us in on your next steps? Like, what questions remain for you as a group, do you think? And what would you love to find out a bit more about?
Yeah, sure. We would like to know whether there are other ways to make games more accessible. And so currently we adapted an existing game to implement AD and other features to enhance the accessibility. But maybe the next step would be co-create a game with visually impaired designers or end users. So we hope we could have a game created by the blind people and for the blind people. That would be a great project, I think.
Which very much gets back to the thing that Claire talked about in a sense, not retrofitting into the game, but actually in a sense designing a game with accessibility at the heart of it, which is something that Claire touched on. Thanks, Adrian, for the tip-off that there's a chance to see the work at Bristol Beacon this September. So we don't need to all travel to Japan to be able to get a glimpse of this. And thanks so much, Xiaochun and team, for the links as well, so that there's a chance to see some of the work on the YouTube channel, or to, I guess, buy the game through at store.steampowered.com. So if you want to get to play the BAFTA-nominated game that Claire and the team have designed and that Xiaochun and Jane have worked on with their team, please do follow the links in chat. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you so much to the two teams for sharing these extraordinary projects and also sharing a little bit about your learning as a team of individuals. And we're really excited to see what happens next. to see the next stages, because these feel like very much work in progress. Thanks everyone, take care, have a good afternoon, stay warm on this this cold day, and we hope to see you again soon. Bye.